Before we do anything more complex with our data, it's a good idea to get a sense of what it really looks like. And a way of describing this is to look at the distribution. There's several reasons that that can be useful. For one thing, it's a really good way to find errors. For instance, I was once working with app analytics data, and what I found was that it looked like some people had spent a negative amount of time in an app. Obviously, that can't happen, so it was a pretty good clue that there was some sort of a problem. And problems like that can be introduced in a number of ways. For instance, it can have something to do with how the data was architected. Maybe it's not pulling in the relevant data or it's calculating it incorrectly. It could be something to do with how the data was captured. For instance, a classic example that I've seen several times is data is being captured and it's being time-stamped, but the timestamp isn't from another area and people don't realize that. So they're thinking it's something that's different than it is. Problems can also be introduced at the data entry stage. For example, sometimes it's the person who's entering the data in the first place is not terribly invested in the quality of data and will just enter whatever and either accidentally make a mistake or just enter the easiest thing for them without realizing that it's not actually correct. Looking at the distribution is also a good way to spot outliers and anything else that's unusual that you need to take into account as you do subsequent analysis. For instance, that example that I gave before about the time spent in app being negative, that's clearly not possible. But it's definitely possible that we might look at app usage data and find that somebody uses the app way, way, way more than most other people do. So it's a valid observation, but it's just a really unusual one. That's good to know because in some types of analysis, we would want to include that unusual observation if it is a valid observation. It's not been caused by some sort of accident. It's really true. It's just very unusual. For some sorts of analysis, we would want to include that. For others, we might want to exclude it. So it's important for us to know that it's there so we can make that decision at the time. Viewing data at this most basic level, too, is also a good way of starting to think about more complex analysis that you might do later and kind of provides a reality check. Once we get into that more complex analysis, it's harder to intuitively get a sense of what's going on, sometimes anyway. But when we're looking at data this way, it's really kind of clear and transparent and stripped back. So if we understand it at this level, it's going to help our understanding when we get to that more complex analysis. And even at this most basic level, looking at the distribution can give us some important insights, and we'll get to some of those shortly.